5 months ago, I made a video about potentially quitting minimalism because I've noticed some things that were kind of bothering me and they had a negative impact on my life. But at the same time, because I've been on my minimalist journey for 10 years, I wasn't ready to let go of the label quite yet. So I decided I'm gonna give myself a little bit more time to really think this through. And now I'm at a point officially where I can say that I'm quitting minimalism without any doubts in my head that this is a good decision for me. So today I wanna go a little bit deeper into this, and I wanna share 4 reasons specifically why I'm no longer a minimalist. And also I'm gonna share my alternative approaches or perspectives that I'm gonna use from now on. Now, the first reason is really important to me, and that is that minimalism stripped me of my identity and I started neglecting my own personal needs, which I think with any kind of movement or with any kind of labels, when we start following that, very often what can happen is that we're so focused on being the true follower of the movement, and we want to keep that label because it does mean something to us, that we start neglecting our personal differences, our personal needs, in fear that if we do something that it's a little bit different, we're not going to be part of that movement anymore. And then the worst part is that usually with all of these labels and movements, and minimalism is no exception here, is that when you follow it for a really long time, rules can keep changing, they keep updating. And then with social media, we have another extra layer because now a lot more people are giving their opinion about the movement, and they may be adding the new rules or maybe policing others. So this is what happened to minimalism. When I discovered it, I remember the main rule was very, very simple, and that was to let go of everything that doesn't serve you and only keep what does. That was it. But of course, that changed, and lately minimalism is not really doing it for me anymore. It's really restrictive. It just has so many rules and I'm over it. And to be more specific here, I want to give you some of my personal examples where exactly I started neglecting my personal needs. And the first one that it makes me sad for myself actually is that I stopped buying items that would fit my body properly, because my weight was kind of fluctuating a lot, as it does with a lot of people. But because now I'm a minimalist, I just didn't allow myself to go out and buy new pieces for my new body. So I just kept waiting and postponing because I didn't want to be wasteful. I didn't want to have too many jeans in different sizes. I didn't want to buy too much, own too much, and I was just restricting myself. And honestly, this is no way to live if you ask me. And then the second way how I strip myself of individuality here is that also, I talked about this before, but I started prioritizing versatility and practicality over everything else. And sometimes when it comes to fashion, yes, it's nice to have versatile pieces, practical pieces, but at the same time, we also want to have pieces that really speak to us, that bring us joy, that express our personality really, really well. For example, with my handbags, when I was in that kind of strong minimalist mindset, I was just obsessing about having handbags without noticeable hardware. But since then, I expanded my collection. So that's the first thing. I now have a lot more bags, which makes me super happy. But then very importantly, they're not without any noticeable hardware. They're actually really unique, they're really special, and they bring me a lot more joy, even though technically they're not as practical and versatile. And then, as I've said, when it comes to the amount of stuff, I had this pressure to have a certain number of items. And I remember, as I said, with my handbags, I decluttered bags, even though I like them, even though I use them, just because in my head the number was too high. So with minimalism, it's very common that we're gonna have these numbers in our head, and we're just gonna think less is better, and we're just gonna keep forcing ourselves to declutter so we can stay a true minimalist. And then the last example of how this impacted me and also my husband is with gift giving. I don't know if I talked about this before, but I actually love gift giving. It's kind of my love language. I think the first one is words of affirmation, but then the second one, it would be gift giving. But pretty much my husband always enjoyed giving me gifts. But then when I was deep into minimalism, I remember that I was just so against any kind of gift giving. I had a talk with pretty much every single person in my life to kind of say, no, we're not gifting each other anymore. Now, to be fair, when it comes to acquaintances or even my friends, this was actually a really good idea, because it was kind of a relief for both of us. But when it comes to close family or close friends, I feel like we shouldn't be restricting gift giving, especially if they genuinely want to give us something. I know with my husband, he used to love gift giving, but now he said that I ruined it for him and he's just overthinking and I just made everything worse. So he's really honest with me, you know, and I'm telling you my experience and my lesson. And honestly, I get it because I feel the same way. I loved giving gifts to my close family and friends because I know exactly what they will need, what they will enjoy. And this Christmas, for example, I absolutely nailed my Christmas gift for my husband. So this is a long story about gift giving, but I just wanted to really explain how labels and movements, if we're not careful, they can strip us of our personal needs. And instead of thinking, what do we want? How do we want to live our lives? How do we want to experience life? We can just say, oh, this is bad, this is good. And we make decisions based on that instead on our own heart. And now the second big reason why I don't like minimalism is because it created this illusion of achievable perfection and peace. And at the beginning, when you stumble onto minimalism, this sounds so empowering and so nice. And when you think about, okay, there are all of these people who live very peaceful, everything is perfect, you just have this inspiration to go and declutter your life, which is not a bad thing in itself, because a lot of people, they struggle with owning too much stuff. So when you first start decluttering, this is actually a very positive thing. We're actually genuinely gonna experience an improvement in our quality of life. But the problem arises because we have this idea, this illusion of perfection and peace, and we keep decluttering and curating and decluttering and perfecting and optimizing and decluttering, thinking we're gonna get there. And honestly, there is a chance we do get to that point, but unfortunately, it doesn't last very long because, surprise, surprise, life is not static. And I have a perfect story to explain all of this. But when I lived in the UK, this was, again, 10 years ago, even probably more. This is when I discovered minimalism and I started decluttering. And because I had this idea that I'm gonna get to the perfect spot, I decluttered too much, I decluttered too quickly because I believed I'm gonna get to the point where everything is perfect and that's it. Then I'm gonna be free and happy. And what happened is that I decluttered a lot of my summer dresses, I decluttered a lot of the winter stuff because in the UK, I just wasn't wearing those. And for a moment, I actually created a perfect wardrobe for the UK weather where I lived. But then only a year after creating all of that, we moved back home where the weather is completely different. There are a lot more changes. And all of a sudden, I had to buy so many new summer dresses. I had to buy new winter stuff. And I kind of had to start from scratch. Now, I don't want you to take this story as a sign to not declutter anything because that is not the point. The problem is that when we think this perfect achievable peace exists, we can become overconfident when decluttering, and we can just declutter and declutter and declutter in the moment. We're not really thinking things through. We have this overconfidence and this illusion that is guiding us, and then we can get in trouble and we can waste so much money. So of course, I'm not saying that we should just keep everything for just in case, because a lot of the times with decluttering, and most of the stuff that I decluttered, I 100% sure knew that I'm never ever gonna need those things again, and I decluttered them and my life was much better. But then I also had things that I wasn't that sure about, but I still decluttered them anyway because I kind of believed in that perfect place. So now what I like to do is I actually have a time hotel storage for all of those items that I'm not really sure about, that I just want to give it a little bit more time before decluttering them. But I have two rules that I follow here so I don't kind of overwhelm myself. And the first one is that I only keep items that I genuinely like or love and are realistic for me to need in the future. So I have to know that, yes, realistically something might happen that I might need those items in the future. If the scenario for me to need this item is really a fantasy, then this is a no-go. And then the second rule that I have is that my time hotel storage cannot overwhelm my living space or my brain. So for example, if we have the entire storage unit that we have to pay for monthly, this is not good because we're pretty much paying a lot of money for stuff that we're not using, or if we have an entire room of stuff that we're not using and it's kind of a mess. This is again affecting our quality of life. But if we have a few drawers in our house, or even the entire closet of time will tell storage, for me this is kind of doable because it doesn't affect our quality of life. And also, if we organize the closet in a nice way, this can kind of allow our brain to forget about those items and we can move with our lives in a very nice way. Because I would never recommend, if you're on the fence about something, that you just keep it in your main wardrobe or main living area. If you have clothes, for example, that don't fit you, I would never recommend that you just have them in your closet. That would negatively impact the quality of your life. But you can definitely take them out of your closet, and because you're not sure if you might need them again because of the weight fluctuations, you're gonna put them in a different drawer or in a different closet where you can forget about these items, not unless that weight change happens again. And now that we're in the middle of the video, I also wanted to ask you that if you're enjoying it so far, that you give it a thumbs up. And also, I know so many of you have so many opinions about this topic, and I love reading your comments. So if you have any thoughts about this, any insights, any of your own stories, experiences with minimalism, leave me a comment down below. I look forward to reading those. Thank you. And now to the third big reason, which is kind of an extension of the second one, and that is that after we realize that life is not static, what can happen is that we develop a fear of change, which maybe sounds a little bit silly, maybe it sounds like a little bit too much, but honestly it happened to me. And when I was reading the comments on my other videos, I know it happened to a lot of you as well. And pretty much what I kind of noticed is that once we've been decluttering for a while and we experience a few lifestyle changes, a few body changes or preference changes, what happens is that we kind of start realizing that this decluttering and curating doesn't really work as well as we thought. And maybe the first time it happens, we're still very optimistic. We're like, okay, that's fine. I curated everything for this life, but now this change happened. That's fine. I'm just gonna buy new pieces and I'm gonna declutter, and that's gonna be my new normal. But then when you go through this a few more times, you kind of realize that you're wasting a lot of money, a lot of energy on this, and it's not really working the way you wanted it to. And what can happen here is that you can completely say, okay, this is whatever, I'm not gonna be a minimalist anymore. Or you can be like me and you can start internalizing everything and thinking you're doing something wrong, and then you start thinking and trying harder, and now you start over analyzing, you start overthinking, and before you make any changes in your life, you're gonna freeze because you're gonna be so afraid of making another mistake. It can be with decluttering. Maybe you're afraid you're gonna declutter something you might potentially buy again in the future because that happened to you before. Or maybe you're afraid to buy something that you might declutter very soon after acquiring it, because that again happened to you before, and it happened to me as well. And when we develop this fear of change and fear of making mistakes, this is really destructive. And it's why I hate minimalism so much, because even though this may sound very far-fetched, I read so many of your comments where you feel exactly the same way. And I think it's no coincidence. And a lot of the time, minimalist influencers, they're just perpetuating this story that we're doing something wrong, that minimalist movement is perfect and we're doing something wrong and we should try harder. And honestly, I don't think that's really the case. And the sooner we accept that life is gonna change all of the time and we cannot really predict the future, the better we're gonna be. And also what I want to mention here, because it's really important, I'm not saying that decluttering doesn't have value. I'm not saying you cannot have a closet that you really enjoy, that brings you a lot of peace and clarity and inspiration and creativity. I'm not saying any of those things, because those are achievable. But what I am saying is that once a change in your life happens, it's better to stop resisting or blaming yourself, but to adjust and accept that this is a part of life. And honestly, what I like to do right now, because before when I was kind of practicing minimalism really strong, I remember I waited sometimes a year or 2 years or even 3 years before decluttering something or buying something, because I was so afraid of making a decision. So my recommendation is not to just impulsively declutter or buy and have no disregards of anything because life changes, but I want us to have some kind of a realistic realistic time frame we can use, so we are a little bit smarter. And what I personally like to follow now, it's 3 to 6 month rule, which means before decluttering something I'm not that sure about, or before buying something I'm not that sure about, I'm waiting a little bit longer, but not too long, because again, if I'm waiting for years, then what's the point, because life is just passing me by. And now the fourth reason I'm really excited about, because it goes a little bit deeper, and I just want to say that minimalism was a coping mechanism for me, and it might be for you as well. Let me know in the comments. But what I've realized is, based on my childhood and how I was growing up, I was never really taught to trust myself. I was never really encouraged to explore what I want and who do I want to be. Nothing like that was allowed. So I kind of grew up scared and not aligned with myself. And because I didn't have this trust in myself, I noticed that I like to follow movements with rules. Because if I follow movements with rules that other people kind of created, then at least I have something to follow, because if I would be just listening to myself, I would be kind of lost. But because I'm a person who likes personal responsibility and I'm working on myself, and over the years I've always deepened the connection with myself and who I want to be and all of that, and I got a lot more clarity, what I've realized is that I don't really need labels anymore, be it with minimalism or anything else, because I can just trust myself and I can make decisions by myself and I can make my own rules for myself and I can change those rules and I can do whatever, because my life is my life, and that's absolutely fine. And then the second side to the same coin was also that I, as a human being, nobody likes to be rejected, but I kind of had this fear of rejection as well. And I thought, because I didn't trust myself, because I didn't know who I am, I thought if I have a label, I can hide behind that label. So if people criticize how much stuff I own, I'm not personally rejected, but they're criticizing the movement, not me. But if I make decisions based on my own self, and if they're criticizing that, then they're criticizing me. And then the last psychological thing that I really noticed when it comes to minimalism is that because of my past traumas, I spent a lot of time in fight and flight, or I would say a lot of things would trigger me to go into fight and flight. So again, minimalism, it was kind of a coping mechanism so I could relax, because there were so many things going on in my body or, outside in life. I just wanted to cope by keeping everything perfect and in control so I could relax. But again, because I'm working on myself and I'm not in fight and flight that much anymore, I mean, occasionally I'm still human, but because this is not who I am anymore, I can handle a lot more things. I have a lot more self-trust and confidence. I'm realizing that my house doesn't need to be as pristine, or not everything has to be perfect anymore. And I just don't need that coping mechanism anymore. And please let me know, does this make sense to you or not? Because I've never heard anyone else talking about this, but for me, it just made so much sense. I had to mention it in case it's helpful to you as well. I really hope this is helpful. And if you're curious about that video that I talked in the beginning that I made 5 months ago about the problems with minimalism, I will link it right here so you can watch it next. But yeah, this is gonna be it for today. I'm so looking forward to reading your comments, and I will see you next time.